Hello, we have Professor Dilip Menon here, one of the leading historians of the South, the global South, and he's actually from Kerala. And Professor Dilip Menon, could you say something about your Kerala days, your childhood, your early education, and then your higher education in Oxford and Cambridge, and your current pursuits and all?
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on the show, and good to be chatting with you, Ajay, particularly in this beautiful location in Kochi. So while I was born in Kerala, I've never really lived here. My mother came to deliver me, and then that was it. Then I spent the rest of my life growing up all over India, so which made me fluent in several languages willy-nilly. But one of the things that was always at the back of my mind when I studied in school, in college and so on, was the fact that very few of us studied the regions where we came from. We were not taught, for example, South Indian history. And very often the teachers were interested in finishing the syllabus, so they would race through the history of the Mauryas, Guptas and so on. And by the time we came to Kerala or Tamil Nadu, the exams were almost there. So as a result, I resolved that I would begin to work on the history of Kerala if only to educate myself, since the educational process had denied me that knowledge. And so when I finished my undergraduate degree in Delhi, I studied in Calcutta, Delhi and so on. And so when I finished my undergraduate degree in Delhi was when the Subaltern Studies School became prominent. And the idea of studying the history of the subaltern became much more nuanced when one thought about it regionally. That in India, we did not know much about Kashmir. We did not know much about the regions of the northeast like Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland and so on. Our occasions for studying the history of Kerala was the fact that much of the work being done on India was, one, through the lens of nationalism, two, through the lens of the Indo-Gangetic plain and its histories, and the third, through the history of the state and its emergence. So when I began my work, of course it was a very conventional PhD that I did at the University of Cambridge, which was looking at the origins of the communist movement in Malabar. But the main argument that I was trying to make at that point was that it's important not to look at the Communist Party and the communist movement as an ideological movement, that it was successful largely because it addressed a very local issue, that of caste, and that they were building upon earlier anti-caste movements led by people like Sahodharan Ayyappan, by Narayana Guru and so on. So in that sense, the communist movement comes as the end of a whole series of questionings of social hierarchy. So that was the work that I did, which also allowed me then to understand Kerala better. It was a bit like my discovery of Kerala, because during the course of my fieldwork, I was coming back every year, spending 3 to 6 months in different parts of Kerala, living with old leaders of the communist movement, spending time with them. So I travelled all the way from Kasaragod to Kanyakumari. So in that sense, I got to know about Kerala much later in my life. And I think I made up for the fact that I didn't grow up here. So that's really, in a nutshell, the early part of my work.
You are well known in Kerala as the critique of communism, and also your very scathing ethical kind of criticism of E.M.S. Namboodiripad. Could you elaborate on that particular issue?
Actually, that's an interesting point in my turn, in my own work, because when I did my PhD, as I said, the work was on the origins of communism, and I would say that the work was largely, in some sense, coming to terms with the history of Kerala, and it was to some extent a celebratory work. That Kerala was distinct from the rest of India, that in the course of around 50 years we had managed to move away from what Vivekananda called the lunatic asylum of caste to a certain degree of social equality, a certain degree of social insurance, high levels of education and so on, all of which we are aware of. But there was one point when I was working in the archives when I came across these inter-party disputes which had not made it to the public realm, where there were disputes going on between the founders of the Communist Party like P. Krishnavalla, Sao Krishnavalla, E.M.S. Namboodiripad, around the issue of who would make it to the upper echelons of the Communist Party. And there it was very clear that the to put it crudely, that the caste hierarchy was replicated in the party structure. That people like C.H. Kanaran, for example, who was an Irava, could not make it to the party secretariat. The large numbers of exclusions that were happening. Then I happened to read Kerala Malayaliyalde Madhubhumi, and in it was a very curious argument about the necessity of caste. And this struck me as initially as puzzling, but as I began reading it and thinking about the way in which Marxism had functioned within India, came to realize that this was a structural problem, that communist leaders and theoreticians had excluded the idea of caste, tried to read it as a matter of class. They devoutly wished that Kerala should become a class society, and therefore they wrote about Kerala society as if caste was just merely a matter of a stage in history which would be transcended, without understanding the experiential suffering, the indignity, and the humiliation that lower caste suffered. So there was no experiential account of the humiliations of caste, because most of the leaders came from the upper caste. Right? They were Nayars or Namboodiris. So that was the reason for my writing how to be or being a Brahmin the Marxist way, that Marxism allowed many of the upper caste leaders a way out, as it were, from a more serious probing of themselves, a more serious probing of the hierarchies within, caste hierarchies within the history of Kerala.